This is Alexa Linton, and you're listening to the Whole Horse Podcast. We're now in season 6. Thanks to all of you tuning in and sharing the podcast with your friends to keep the momentum going. This podcast is dedicated to all things horse and all things that uplift equine well-being and welfare. And I'm having down-to-earth conversations with equine professionals about the little things that move the dial slowly but surely towards a better world for horses. You'll find all the episodes, 93 and counting now, on iTunes, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcast. Thanks for being here and enjoy the ride. Hi, everyone, and welcome back. You're here on the Whole Horse Podcast, and it's Alexa here. I'm here today with someone I'm really excited to chat with. I've been seeing her posts for a while now, especially on Facebook, and really feeling like, yeah, we need to have a conversation. So I'm really pleased to welcome Yasmin Stuart here. Welcome, Yasmin.
Hello, thank you so much for inviting me on. I've followed your podcast for quite a while now, so I was quite excited actually when you messaged me and invited me on. It's like, yes, that's really cool. Really excited. So thank you.
Yay, awesome. It's so funny, hey, like following each other across the world, being like,
Yeah.
oh, she's so cool.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's funny how I think there's a really cool thing going on in the industry at the minute where there feels like a lot of alignment between professionals, and there are people on your radar that maybe you haven't spoken to before, but then somehow a conversation gets initiated and you think, oh, I've been following this person for ages and it's really cool that we get to chat and it really does align. Yeah, it's a really cool thing.
I agree. I'm seeing it more and more and more with these weavings of like, oh, that community just sort of interweaved with that community, and these, these different concepts I've been following, sort of tracking individually for a while, sort of coming together in different ways that in amazing collaborations. Like one of the ones that I was so amazed by was a trainer that I trained with in bridle horse work from the US, Bruce Sandifer, who's incredible, hooking up, like connecting and collaborating with a balanced movement method practitioner, and them starting to kind of, play with what the interface is between those two bodies of work. It's like,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah, it's really cool because I think the thing that I really sense in the industry at the minute is a lot of empowerment for people to dip their toe into different pieces of work and really apply the bits that resonate. And I think that's so powerful. And then when you get Cummings together, I was gutted that I couldn't make it to the Bruce Sandifer and Heather Cornman clinic because I wanted to go and audit and I just couldn't make it work. But it's really cool to go, this isn't, you see things bandied about where it's like a cult or it's this or it's that, and it's not. It's just there to be woven into all of your horse practice for the betterment of the horse and for the betterment of your relationship with your horse. So it's really cool. And it was cool. I saw his comment about his thoughts about the work afterwards, and that was really cool. It's really validating on both ends of the spectrum for such an astute horseman to have those drawings and to really acknowledge its place in the industry. That was really cool.
I agree. Yeah. And having known Bruce, I actually took my first clinic with him probably 12 years ago. He was the one who introduced me and my mare to the spade bit and this whole world of bridle horse. I've actually visited his home in Santa Barbara and ridden with him there. And he's the real deal. This is the real deal. Yeah. So when I saw that, I was like, oh yeah, this is amazing to see these weaving of worlds. So yeah, it's an exciting time. It's an exciting time for all of this. And I want to start here, Yasmin, because there's sure to be people listening in today that haven't heard of you, haven't heard of your work, maybe haven't seen your posts. Can you share a little bit about kind of what you're up to at the moment, what your background is?
Yeah, of course. So I'm an equine physiotherapist. I navigated my way into the industry kind of laterally. So I I guess the easiest place to start would be right at the beginning, where physiotherapy, just as a whole, not equine related, came into my life. At my first horse job, I got a job at a livery yard, and I kind of felt at the time that I really fell on my feet, and it definitely pushed me into the trajectory that I'm on right now. My boss at the time was a classical dressage trainer, not from any particular school. But there was a sort of training group in the UK called the Training the Teachers of Tomorrow Trust, the TTT. It's now been disbanded, but I believe there are a couple of other places in the UK who have kind of picked up those trainers. But basically, she used to go down to the TTT fairly regularly and have lessons with the trainers there, and then maybe I would go along and watch as well. So I got to see all sorts of people having different lessons with these trainers who had really classical influences, and that was my first kind of come to Jesus moment where, 18 years old, I thought I knew how to ride and I was the big I am. And my first ever lesson I had with her, I didn't get out of walk and sometimes barely got out of hold. So that was my first grounding really into there being a different avenue in the horse world. And when I was working there, I reflected on this a few months ago, actually. I had a series of accidents one week after the other. And now I reflect back and I think there were definitely some management things that could have meant that those accidents were avoided. But, ignorance is bliss. And I fell off of a horse. I got bronked off of a horse. And then I got kicked in the ribs by a horse the week after. And then my darling little fjord pony squashed me against the stable wall. And I wound up off the back of that being in so much pain that I could barely walk. And I was 18 at the time, and I was kind of a bit like, well, this kind of sucks. And I didn't want to go down the hospital route or the doctor route because I didn't think it was viable. And someone said to me, oh, there's a physiotherapist in the village who you should go and see. They'll help you out. And that really triggered a journey through all sorts of different professionals. The physiotherapist that I went to see in the beginning was a little bit of a shady character and had some kind of weird practices and definitely didn't shine the light on the best professional in the world. But I kept at it and I kept seeking to find different professionals. And in the end, I found a chiropractor who specialized in radiography. And he took x-rays of my back and he diagnosed me with a compressed and herniated disc and degeneration of my last lumbar vertebra. Oh, and he said, oh, and you're not going to ride again. You're not going to get on horse ever again. And I felt at the time, I didn't know anything about bodies, but I felt that his diagnosis and subsequent prognosis were kind of extreme. I felt that the diagnoses were maybe longer standing than my 3 consecutive accidents that got me to where I was. And I also was like, well, I'm going to ride. So I'm going to go find someone who can help me on my journey. So that meant, again, I was hopping around from different professionals, still not quite finding what I was looking for. And I got to a point where I could go maybe 3 months pain-free. And then on that very final day, it was like someone flicked a switch and my back would go again. And then I'd go and see that professional. They put me back together, and then 3 months. And really, I was getting quite frustrated about why that was occurring because I was young. I was fit and healthy, why was it that predictable? And then I found a sports and he was a remedial sports therapist, I believe was his title, but I may have gotten that wrong. It was quite a while ago now. And he basically taught me how to move differently. So combined with body work, there was gym work, there was yoga, there was, there was strength training. And that meant that I learned how to walk differently, but also suddenly I was pain free and also I could maintain myself. So I wasn't reliant upon going to different professionals and my health wasn't beholden to them. And that was really cool. It was really cool and really empowering. And I sort of thought to myself, if we're riding these horses and they're experiencing pain and discomfort, then we need a way around that that's also going to enhance their well-being under saddle and also going to give them the tools that they need to be fit and strong and healthy under saddle. So I looked around for different courses and I wanted to be a little bit more than a sports massage therapist. I wanted to really dive down into the prescriptive exercise stuff because the classical dressage had really unlocked like a fascination for me of biomechanics. And that's where I found my equine physiotherapy diploma. And I did that, I think it was about 8 years ago now that I completed that. And that was cool. I, even at the time, had a lot of very strong beliefs about how horses should and should not be trained, which is still something that I believe is put across in my social media as much as my tone has changed. But throughout my journey, it really was like that dance between bodywork, the effectiveness of bodywork, and then the horse's biomechanics, and then how they were trained, and then their welfare state within that. So looking at how they were managed. And I started to connect the dots between how their management affected their training affected their emotional well-being, much like their management did. And that actually these horses, I started to see sort of patterns in their posture that would crop up. And I started to be able to recognize, oh, well, that posture occurs because that horse is trained in this sort of way, or that horse is ridden behind the vertical, or that horse is hyperflexed, and I started to actually feel quite disempowered because from a bodywork perspective, I was coming out and I was treating those horses. And, you know, my prescriptive exercise training when I was training to be an equine physiotherapist was very much pole work and baited stretches. Oh, and a bit of lateral work. And you weren't really taught the mechanism around how that really helped the horse or hindered the horse, and you weren't really taught the appropriateness of it. But likewise, you also weren't taught anything outside of the suitability for that horse to be ridden, other than, oh, well, that horse is head nod lame, or that horse is hip hike lame. So there was a whole kind of enmeshment where there are a lot of horses that you see on a daily basis which may not be head nod or hip hike lame, but actually their training is not helping them to get out of that cycle that they're in of poor posture. And then within that as well, they, you know, are managed in situations that aren't conducive to their well-being too. So then you're faced with a situation where an owner is contacting you with a specific problem with their horse, and you turn up, and the problem that they are kind of aware of, the problem that's on their periphery, is for me just kind of the tip of the iceberg. You know, you think, well, your horse maybe throws a buck when you ask him to left lead canter, but actually he gets 2 hours turnout a day and he gets no friends to interact with, and he also gets you know, he doesn't get enough forage. Oh, and by the way, his posture probably doesn't actually support a rider. So then we've got all of these issues that we need to unpick. So yeah, within that, I've flitted around between different training methodologies, just really kind of following my nose and finding what feels good. So within that, I think for me, as I started to come away from the classical dressage, and that was because I was seeing sometimes the narrative didn't fit the picture. And sometimes, you know, I could see the outcome, I could see what they were looking to achieve in the training situation. But then with my understanding of biomechanics and equine physiotherapy, I couldn't see how that exercise was ultimately going to achieve the end goal. But also I started getting interested in more of the horsemanship side of things as well. So how horses learn. I then kind of found myself in the dressage naturally circle, so Karen Rolfe's work, which I found really interesting. It really, again, started to dip my toe into how you could influence the body in a way that was more aligned towards the connection piece, which was something that I felt was sometimes lacking with my previous training. And then from there, I wanted something more science-based. So I found myself in more of an equitation science world. And that was interesting because I learned about learning theory and I learned how training systems that or training situations, not systems, that I had been exposed to before. Maybe that's how they worked or did not work, was the learning theory piece within that. And then that whole world kind of coincided with my previous horse, Falcon, who was very sadly put down last year for situations. He was quite a traumatized horse, and behaviorally he could be quite challenging, and he had exhausted all of my skill set and all of the skill set of the professionals around me, and was beginning to be quite unsafe with his behavior, as well as having some postural and biomechanical things going on with him that made him feel significant discomfort each day. So it made him quite difficult to manage, particularly with a horse that operated on low grade fear aggression as well. So he was very sadly put down last year. And one of my clients, after that situation, she said to me, "Hey, I've seen this work and I think you'll really like it. I think it really aligns with your thoughts and feelings in the industry." And at that point, I was feeling quite disillusioned because I'd put a lot of effort into my skill set and trying to find best ethical practice. And it wasn't enough for me with my horse, and it wasn't enough for my horse. And then also, social media can be beautiful, but it can also be the most depressing place on the universe. So then I was seeing people doing not very nice things to their horses on social media. And I felt quite bitter about that. I tried really hard and I tried to be really ethical and aligned with welfare practice, and, really tried to meet all of his behavioral needs too. And it wasn't enough. And I wasn't even riding him because I didn't feel, with his discomfort that he was in, and his emotional reaction to situations that just didn't happen. So my client said, "You should look at this work." And I just thought, I just don't need to see more stuff on the internet, which is just the rehashing of old stuff. And I just don't want to see it. I don't really care for it. And she went on and on and on about it. And in the end, I said, "Fine, I will listen to a podcast and I will then be able to tell you why I hate it, and then you'll leave me alone." And anyway, that turned out, I can't remember what podcast it was specifically, but it ended up being Celeste talking on a podcast about her work. And I thought, I actually really like that. And actually, that is a huge piece of the puzzle that I have been chasing when I've had all of the theoretical understanding of why a horse should be moving in good posture, but nothing we can do is helping that horse to move in good posture. And that really was that piece. So that then started to re-scratch the posture itch and reignite my love for the work again. And I hadn't signed up for the masterclass. I was just sort of scratching away with the little nuggets that Celeste gave away on the course. And it was amazing. It just, the connection piece and, the act of down regulating the brachiocephalic, so down regulating the tone in the brachiocephalic, which really helps a horse to down regulate their nervous system, but also unlock parts of their body that were locked up. It blew my mind, even with the little nuggets of information, which were, again, just the tip of the iceberg that she gave away on the podcast. So I posted on social media about it, and, that I'd been trying this stuff and it was really cool and interesting. And she messaged me and she was like, "Hey, I've added you into the masterclass. Let me know what you think." And I thought, oh goodness, I've really got to take this seriously now. So I went, headlong into the masterclass, picking up as much information as I could. And then she released dates for nerve release training in California last year. And at the time, I was managing an equine physiotherapy diploma. And it was blended learning. So the theory studies were done online and the practical studies were done at the college site, where we taught bodywork techniques and rehabilitation techniques, and we did all of our practical work. And it just so happened that
Oh,
my study weeks that we were running there fell at the same time as the nerve release training, which I was really gutted about. And I said to my other half, I'd really, really like to I'd really like to go, but I can't because I've got study weeks. And he said, well, what are you teaching? And I said, well, we're teaching clinical reasoning. And he said, well, I can do that. He's a human and animal osteopath. He said, I might not be an equine physiotherapist, but I can teach clinical reasoning. That's no problem. My students were familiar with his work because he taught there too. I invited him to teach there. That was before we got together. And yeah, so he very kindly took my students for me, him and a couple of other members of his team. And I went to California and got to do the nerve release training, which again took my entire physiotherapy skill set that I had and sort of shook out the toolkit and put some more tools in there and shone a great deal of light on many other subject areas and really shifted my lens, but also really enhanced the posture work that I had started to kind of really ruminate on the patterns that I was seeing presenting with lots of different horses. So it put another piece of the jigsaw puzzle together with that, which I guess has been a really long rambling into me saying where I'm at now. I no longer work for the college. My private practice absolutely took off when I came home, which was amazing. I'm just really grateful to Celeste for giving me that opportunity. So I left my job at the college, and now I've been practicing full time again in equine physiotherapy rather than part time with the program manager role. Again, I started to see patterns occurring. So I'd be coming out and assessing a horse's posture, and from their posture, I could basically tell how they were going to move. And you'd always watch them move because, I just wanted to really reinform what I was seeing. And then you would be able to say to an owner, well, from your horse's posture, I expect I'm going to see this. But then does that mean that your horse does this under saddle or feels like this, that, or the other? And I could basically predict the problems that they would feel under saddle. And with that as well, I also started to recognize that the things that we really want to achieve from horsemanship. So, if you're wanting a horse with spinal mobility and range of motion and the capability to flex through their thoracic region, if they're stood in spinal extension without a saddle on their back and then without a rider, and that's, making the broad assumption that their saddle fits, which it quite often doesn't, then if they're in that spinal extension, then really it's quite a tall order to ask them to carry the weight of a rider when their posture is so poorly prepared to receive the weight of a rider. And then not only was I looking at horses in spinal extension, but then I was seeing horses with various camped out or camped under postures, camped out, camped under, falling postures, with various muscular development or lack thereof, and obvious overuse through specific regions of their spine, which then start to put them into sort of a pathology danger zone. So as much as from a bodywork perspective, you can't diagnose, or in the UK legally you can't diagnose, but having had the opportunity to pick up cases off the back of their veterinary intervention. So maybe they had treatment for kissing spines last year and they're no longer under the vet, but their posture still very much resembles the kissing spines horse that they were a year ago. Or maybe they had stifle issues, and as much as they're not under the vet, they're still really lacking in quadricep muscle and they're still quite hypertrophied through their hamstrings. You're looking at this horse thinking, well, you're being ridden right now, but your body's really not prepared for that. And then starting to think about the welfare implications of that as well. Not only are we expecting you to work and expecting you to carry us around when your body's not prepared for that, but also are we inadvertently exposing you to situations where maybe there could be the development of an orthopedic pathology off the back of how you're moving. Or maybe because of how you're moving, you experience so much pain and conflict around a training situation. As much as you haven't got an orthopedic pathology, your body just can't cope with this. And then not only that, but then we see an owner getting frustrated and angry because their horse doesn't do the thing that they want them to do. So I've spent a lot of time explaining to people how unprepared their horses were for ridden work, in my professional opinion. And a lot of people were kind of shocked because maybe the body worker before them said there wasn't a problem, or maybe I would refer them to the vet because I was concerned there was a problem, even though they had no indication of it other than their horse maybe didn't want to canter on the left rein. And lo and behold, that horse had kissing spines or had some sort of hock arthritis or stifle injury. And I kind of felt that so many people were being shocked by the things that I was finding that maybe I should just put together a little course, with all of the patterns that I've seen and all of the findings that I've had as a way for owners to meet their horse where they're at as well. And I think that really complements the work that Celeste has done with the nerve release work and BTMM as a whole, because it adds just another layer of understanding. So we've got the connection piece, we've got the understanding of nerve release, and we've got the understanding of the development of nerve impingements and the biomechanics of that. But then for people to really look back and look at their horse and go, okay, I really understand what neutral looks like, and I really understand how my horse has deviated away from neutral, which has basically been kind of my life's work up until now. So
Awesome.
I put that together in a little course, and that launched at the end of last month and has been doing quite well. I expected it to just cover costs, and it's done more than that, which has been amazing. But moreover, I've received messages from people saying, "Oh, I understand, this makes so much sense." And the course, I haven't finished the first run of the course yet, so there's still more videos to go live, but really it's just helping people to meet their horse where they're at and just understand, when they meet a point of resistance, rather than it being an escalation of pressure or we just need to do more of that. It's really understanding where that point of resistance comes from and what they can do about it in a way that empowers them, but also empowers their horse too.
Yeah.
Sorry, I feel like I've talked a lot for the past.
Oh, that's great. We've gotten to
20
know
minutes.
you. And I'm so intrigued because, posture it's funny. It's sort of become, I don't want to say a dirty word, but there was this whole debate around like neuroscience and posture and whether neutrality is even a thing. And if, if they're moving in functional ways, as an osteopath myself, this has become a real kind of, okay, I was trained to look at symmetry and neutrality and, what the balance and typology was of posture, right? And there's a big movement now around, well, if you're moving and if it's functional, then great. I would love to know, and that's also worked for me. So as someone with a back injury, that's really worked well for me, that neuroscience perspective and finding functionality in my movement. So I'd love to know from you, like, where does that sit for you? With the work that you're doing with posture?
That's a really cool question. And I've also been down that rabbit hole of, I'm functioning and this serves me well. And I think there's one thing to nod to, the classical dressage background really suited me quite well because of the low grade, and you can psychoanalyze as much as you like. But the low grade sort of perfectionist complex,
yes.
that really does massage.
Like, you will be here.
You will be perfect. And that was good, but now it needs to be better. But I think it speaks to a couple of things. So for a human, I feel that metric works really well because as humans, we're really good at going, oh, this is uncomfortable for me, so I'm not going to do it. I think the tricky thing with a horse is when a horse turns around and says, this isn't comfortable for me, I'm not going to do it. Maybe there's a rider with a stick kind of telling the horse, actually, you are going to do it. So for me, posture and behavior go hand in hand. And this was something that I was actually teaching the other weekend. I did an introduction to prescriptive exercise, which I'll get onto later. But when we're looking at posture, neutral for me is more of a signal that the horse has equal opportunity to move through either end of their range of motion spectrum. So when we're watching a horse move, they need to be able to access flexion and extension in their spine in order to have full limb range of motion. So when a forelimb moves forward in a healthy thoracic region, in my opinion, healthy, the thoracic region should have the capability to extend. And as a forelimb comes back, the thoracic region should have the capability to flex. So that kind of means if we've got a horse who's biased for extension through their thoracic region and they're moving in a way that's extended, we're then actually making it harder for that horse to find spinal flexion. So then when we're wanting the horse to support the weight of a rider, they're already in extension. And so in the very best, they're going to maintain that extension, but at worst, perhaps they become more extended through their spine.
Mm-hmm.
And then that can put them in a danger zone of pathology. And I think it's not so much the biomechanics of that. So yes, I think each horse is deeply individual, but then it's being able to assess their behavior within that. So we know that behavioral ethograms are a thing now. So we know we've got Sue Dyson's work on the ridden pain ethogram, and we know that we've got our metrics for identifying a pain face. But what I don't really see is that being used as the metric for how okay your horse is. So if you've got a horse that is stood or moves in spinal extension, what does their behavior around that detail as well? And that's slightly more than just, is the horse lame or not? But okay, well, when we ask for that trot transition and the horse's posture disintegrates, does their demeanor disintegrate too? When that horse moves up through that trot transition and we see the sclera in their eyes and their ears laid back, and maybe they open their mouth or swish their tail or do all of these things, that for me is where we can start to see, well, we've had the postural decline there, and also the behavior says that that was really hard. And what I've started to see is, whilst it's, I'm really trying to draw myself away from perfect because I know that that's not sustainable, but it's saying, well, this horse is so far away from neutral that actually if we encourage them more into a neutral position, does that behavior start to diminish? And I understand that this is a difficult variable to isolate, because sometimes in helping a horse to achieve more of a neutral position, maybe you have to take them out of a ridden situation, and maybe within that you have a whole connection piece through BTMM that enables the rider to meet the horse where they're at and really understand their thoughts and feelings around a situation. But with that, you also have postural restoration. Then when you reintroduce the horse into a ridden setting, they're more capable of doing the thing that they were that we wanted them to do in the first place. And also we have riders or owners who are then beginning to get more aware of the fact that their horse is struggling with something. So maybe they start to make better choices for their horse in a training situation as well. I found that to be really useful. So as I said, a couple of weeks ago, I did a prescriptive exercise demo day. And genuinely, I think people thought I was going to teach them 1,000,001 ways they could lead their horses over poles. But actually, I taught them to identify postural indicators in the static horse, dynamic indicators in the postural indicators in the dynamic horse rather, and then look for behavioral regression, and then look for biomechanical regression. So the horse we used on that day was very well versed at moving over poles. But then when we asked them to move over poles in different posture, that meant that they had access to more spinal range of motion. Seeing how their behavior declined, even very subtly, was really interesting, even though they were walking over 2 poles. And we often think 2 poles is super easy. Why don't we raise them up? Why don't we add another pole? Why don't we add 5 or 6 poles? Because it is just poles. So that's where I use the posture as a metric. And I hope that's answered that a little bit, and I'd be
Yeah.
interested to know your thoughts on that.
I think it's super interesting. So I've studied a bit of the work of Kathy Sierra with Panther Flow, and I think as well, I mean, there's alignment there in terms of her crunches. Like she's very much, okay, the horse has to be able to flex their, have flexion in their back to support a saddle. This has been a really interesting one for me because my mare Diva is now 24 and she's always had an incredibly long back. And I often wondered, okay, what's going to happen as she ages, her tissues start to change in elasticity, things start to shift. And of course, the back has dropped, or not of course, but the back has dropped. And it's been a really interesting one for us to work with because we've ridden a lot over our lifetime, not hard, but we've done a lot of different things and we enjoy the connection of riding together. For a time, I stopped riding her because I thought, okay, like I don't want to create further extension in her spine. But it's been very interesting lately. I've been getting back into riding as my own health is better. And been really watching her for, like you say, pain indicators, signs of stress, changes in behavior. And I've noticed as we go very, very slowly. And of course, I've integrated some of the balanced movement method work in with her as well. And even though her posture, probably someone would come out and go, oh, she's like pretty extended in her back. There doesn't seem to be that I can tell. She's quite happy to go under saddle, quite content with her transitions. We're taking it very, very slowly. I do very short amounts of trot and canter work.
Mm-hmm.
Most of it is walk, a lot of, work with lateral and just helping us both kind of gain fitness. But it's been really interesting to me because I think, I was feeling so hesitant, but it has become a place that we've come back to. And I feel like she is benefiting from it, even though it's not necessarily showing up at this point in her posture. Does that make sense?
That makes total sense. And I think this is where it's really important to understand your horse as an individual as well. And I think there can be many different drawings from that conversation because for some people they go, no, my horse is fine. He really loves it. He really loves it. And you see his face and you think,
Like,
does he though? Yeah. But if you're really aligned again with the behavior that's occurring within the biomechanics, then that I think that for me really is the sweet spot. And it's not demonizing posture or demonizing movement. I think there is also that juggle, particularly with an older horse, where you want to maintain muscle mass as well. And you also see that with orthopedic injuries too. So if you've got a horse with kissing spines and you go, well, I'll just turn them away for a bit, well, actually, you might end up with a significantly weaker and possibly more painful horse off the back end of that, rather than doing gentle exercise to tolerance. So it is so deeply individual. And I think that there are horses out there who do really enjoy the work. I think that we have to be really real with ourselves about our own personal narrative over the top of that as well. So if you can identify the behaviors and, identify that your horse really is cool with it, then that's fantastic. And that's kind of where I also like my owners to really be the best advocate for their own horse.
Yeah.
And with that being the advocate, it's also going, okay, my horse is doing really well here and that's great, or my horse is struggling. And actually, maybe if my trainer doesn't recognize that my horse is struggling, maybe I can be the person that says, no, I think this is kind of a bit much.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I really have seen that with my other mare, and I was telling you a bit about this before the podcast. So I've signed up for the nerve release course, the self-study with Celeste, and she was generous enough to support us. I had asked her, so Raven has had this thing, and it's been since I've had her, so 2 or 3 years, and it's gotten worse. It's gotten worse over time, where when you put the saddle on and do up the girth, very loosely, she'll stand to have the saddle on and the girth on, and she's fairly content. As soon as she moves, she just is like panicked.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting because what'll happen is I've showed this to a few trainers and they're like, oh, well, we'll just like let her move it out and work through it. I'm like, something else
Hmm.
is going on. Like something else is happening here. This is not just like her behaving in a bad way. Like there's something happening. And I had this realization because I did it one day. I put it on while she was just free. I thought, okay, what will she do? And she stopped eating. She went, oh my gosh. And then she ran over to her tire pedestal, put her front feet on her pedestal. And
That's
I
interesting.
realized that she was loosening her girth.
Hmm.
When I went and checked her girth, she had loosened off her girth. I'd ask her to come off the pedestal and move out. She was like, she'd go for a little tiny circle, then put her feet on the pedestal. And I was like, there is definitely something
Yeah.
more going on. Like this is
Yeah.
not a behavior thing. I mean, it's presenting as behavior, but it's something else. And
Yeah.
Celeste immediately was like, okay, try this. She gave me, a tool to work with. And then we put on the saddle and the girth afterwards, did a couple pillar threes, put on the saddle and girth. And lo and behold, Raven just
Hmm.
walked off calmly. First time
Yeah.
she's done that. And I was like, it's a nerve impingement. She's getting
Yeah.
compression down her front left leg and it's painful and she's panicked. She's like,
Hmm.
how do we feel when we've got nerve pain? It's
Yeah.
so
It
painful.
hurts.
Like
Yeah.
the shooting, right? And yeah, and I'm a body worker and I knew that there was something going on, but I couldn't figure it out, right? This is, I think, one reason why we need the support and help of,
Mm.
different
I
people, the eye and the lens, right? Because
Yeah.
this sort of thing, I'm sure so many horses have something like this happening and people just tell them, stand still, don't do that. It's like,
Yeah.
and they've got
Yeah.
something really painful occurring that they could have support with, right, to feel better. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Hmm.
I totally agree. And I know, that as a journey you've been on with your mare, I know that I had that with my little ex-racehorse mare when I first got her, and she was 4 years old and, basically fresh off the track. And when I got on, she had to trot round the arena with her head up in the air.
Hmm.
And I thought, well, I'll just let her trot it out. She just needs to move her body. And it's like,
Mm-mm.
no, no,
Mm-mm.
no.
Oh, darn. I
And
know, right?
and I look back on that and you can feel guilt and shame, which I think when you're an empathetic human you naturally do. But also she has now subsequently taught me, no, that's a pretty big indicator that they're feeling pretty painful and pretty unsafe, actually. So if in conjunction with the other professionals out there doing amazing things for horse welfare, if we can shine that light, so less horses go through that. Obviously, gold standard would be no horses go through that. That would be
Hmm.
fantastic. But if less horses go through that, but also less owners feel conflict, because on top of that, when I've said to people, I really believe there's something wrong with your
Hmm.
horse, the amount of people who have cried because they feel seen and
Yep.
heard that there's
Yep.
something wrong with their horse, and it's not another professional telling them to increase the pressure that they're using in a training situation. So yeah, I think it's amazing that we've now got this proliferation of an awesome modality that can be used as a diagnostic measure, not just as a training tool to get your horse to do the thing, but also to help you to identify there's something wrong.
Yeah.
So powerful.
Amazing. Amazing. Really. I want to track back to the posture conversation because I
Mm.
have a curiosity and I think I know, the answer to this, but I think for a lot of people, there is this question mark around the difference between conformation and posture. Because, like when I look at Diva, for example, I'm like,
Yes.
oh, you were put together like the best possible way. But, but then
Yeah.
I look at how she goes and all of those things. I'm like, actually, you're pretty cool. Like she has a naturally released brachiocephalicus, like it's, you know, which is my other mare doesn't have. And you look at her, you're like, oh, you have nice conformation. Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
just wondering, like, what for you is that difference between those two things?
So confirmation when you look at it in a dictionary, really refers to the shape and the structure of something. So if we're looking at a horse, for me, the easiest thing would be to look at the thing that is least movable. And that would be the bones. So, as in the size and shape of each bone. So, that might refer to the length of the horse's cannon bones or the width of the horse's cannon bones. But also, conformation is partially informed for me by the shape of the articular surfaces between each bone, because that limits a range of motion that a joint can move through. Whereas posture, when you look at it in the dictionary, I can't remember the exact wording, but it's something like the position at which someone chooses to sit or stand. And that really comes down to what the muscles are doing. And I think there is confusion between posture and conformation, because when you look at research around posture, they tend to talk about conformation, and they'll talk about joint angles and things like that, and the appropriate joint angles for a jumping horse and a dressage horse. And I think, well, your joint angles can change at any given moment in time. So really what we're looking at actually is something quite variable. So when you're looking at a horse with upright hind limb conformation, so that looks at the relationship between the femur and the tibia, and then the femur, the tibia, and then maybe the metatarsals, the cannon bones, they're becoming upright. That doesn't really speak to conformation, because when a horse moves, they move through a range of motion. That really kind of speaks to, for me, the fact that there's muscular disbalance, and we can change that. And we can change that pretty reliably. You know, I've seen farrier re-intervention that changes that, or hoof care intervention that changes limb alignment. And then also, if we move through prescriptive exercise that changes that muscular development, you know, that really starts to change how these joints are interacting with each other. So suddenly the horse that's got terrible conformation because they've got upright hind limbs actually starts to have hind limbs that have a little bit more flexion in all the right places. And that horse that was discounted because of their terrible conformation suddenly actually has quite good conformation if we're looking at limb length, and actually also has quite good posture too. So that for me is the difference. I know research has different opinions, as research always does. So there are some that still go down the confirmation route, but I know that I know that Karen Gelman, who has got some incredible work on posture, you know, she's quite quick to detail the difference between conformation and posture, and that we do have an influence on that. And I think as well, shining a light on that, because that was an amazing question, really does start to empower horse owners. So rather than someone going, oh, he's always been like that, or he'll always be like that, kind of gives people the power to change that. And that just, for me, feels quite exciting, because imagine a horse that feels better in their body, you know, that's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, that's the aim really at the end of the day is, okay, like, how do we get these beings that we love feeling great in their bodies,
Yes.
so that they want to
Yes.
offer up these things, like, and it's easy for them, right? Like, I think that's the beautiful thing. I saw that with Diva for so long. She was so, you know, all these terms, behind the leg, lazy, da 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 da, you know, like all this terminology. I'm like, okay, but when she's feeling good in her body, she's forward, she's happy to move out. I don't need anything to ask her to do that. Even like she just offers that up, right? And I think that's something, so often we get into these fights around it where it's actually a pain or a posture issue, not a behavior issue, not a laziness issue, right?
Yeah. And I think within that, in many cases, a lot of people are kind of going along the right lines of what they're looking for, but maybe they're not spending long enough just solidifying each behavior. And by behavior, I mean solidifying each movement before they progress to the next. And the most powerful thing I've found about the movement that we have going on at the minute is it's just making people be a bit slower and a bit more cognizant about what they're doing with their horses. And then with that, you reduce that layer of friction for the horse, you know, maybe saying, I can't cope with this right now. But then, you know, that layer of friction for the owner by being able to say, well, I meet my horse where my horse is at. And if this is what they're capable of right now, well, I guarantee that they're going to be significantly more capable of what I would like them to do later on the line if I'm just being more patient, you know?
Big time, big time. I think
Yeah.
even remembering, for me, it's like remembering to slow down so much that, oh, my 24-year-old mare can actually get the lubrication in her joints and,
Yeah.
find that sense of fluidity in her system, right? Because so
Yeah.
often, like, can you imagine if we were just like, someone was like, okay, we're going for a run, and it's like literally
Yeah.
like, okay, you have until the front door to get warmed up, and then you're
Yeah.
off, and
Yeah.
you can't stop, like,
Yeah.
and we'd just be like, oh my God, it's so creaky, everything's just
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
fluid, not flowing,
Why
and
is this so hard? Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's like
And not
taking that time, I think, is so important.
And I think again, speaking to that with your older horse, I think that's just incredible as well. I see so many people who go, "Well, I thought my horse was done, but now I've done a little bit of this work, I've done a little bit of pillar one." And suddenly, I mean, his body looks totally different. And we've maybe done 10 minutes over the course of a week, and we've only just started. But I just think it's a whole exciting world of possibilities for people and their horses. And yeah, I just adore all of it. I think it's incredible.
It is really, really so fun. Yeah.
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 I wanted to chat a little bit about nerve release. We're coming up to the end, but I'm so curious about this world, and I just launched my big course, so I haven't really got a chance to get into the course yet. And I do some nerve release on my human clients, and I find it really potent. Just the sense of, I saw a video actually the other day, which was so fascinating for me. I'll use that terrible pun, because the fascia, it was a video of like the fascia with the nerves actually like literally embedded in this fascial layer, and the
Mm.
veins and the vessels. And so this sense, when someone took, moved even a part of that fascia, that all the nerves and the vessels mobilized with that fascia. And
Yeah.
I think we often get into this trap where we think of, oh, there's the nerves, and then separate from that, there's the veins, and separate from that, there's fascia, and separate from that, there's
Hmm.
muscle, right? And we lose out, I believe, when we think that way, because it is all so enmeshed, embedded, you know.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And I think for me, the key piece with that is whatever body work you do, you're interacting with all of it. So you can't just be a massage therapist because you're interacting with the fascia, and you can't just you can't just be an osteopath, working with bones or whatever rhetoric that anyone has put around that, because you're working with the fascia, you're working with the nerves, you're working with the vascular system, you're working with the muscles. It's all of it. It's all of it. I think the key thing that I have found with the nerve release and integrating the nerve release into my practice is it's integrating the movement within that. So it's not just
Mm.
taking the nervous system out of the pain zone, but also saying, right, we've taken you out of this pain zone, and now we're going to encourage you to move differently to
Mhm.
keep you out of that pain zone. I think for me, my takeaway from it, and I think, you know, everyone's experience is deeply individual, but it's really about recalibrating the nervous system. So giving the horse permission to move in a way that's more aligned with healthier biomechanics and access to all of their body systems, and keeping them out of that pain zone whilst doing that, so they can learn not to, because we know what it's like to be in pain. You get scared to move through
Mhm.
ranges of motion because it might hurt you. And then with that, your nervous system adapts and tells you that, this tiny little range of motion is all of the range of motion you have within this joint. So as much as you can release that, you can do your bodywork techniques to release that. And, nerve release for me, I think there are a lot of modalities that look a lot like nerve release, but it's the specifics of doing that and then incorporating the movement into that to give the horse permission to find that new range of motion and relearn that this is where their body is at. I hope
Mm.
that's answered that
Yeah,
for
it
you.
absolutely
It's
does. And
such a huge subject.
I'm so grateful that I had the little moment with Celeste there, because that really helped me, because we did a technique and then she said,
Hmm.
okay, now do your static pillar 3.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And that was to one side. Okay, let's try it to the other side. So it was this sense of, yes, we'd done the technique, but had Raven really realized that it wasn't going to hurt?
Hmm.
And then
Exactly.
that shift, that was when she licked and chewed. That was when she went,
Hmm.
oh, right. Went
Yeah.
out and did a walk circle in pillar 1, and you could see like the wheels are turning. Oh,
Hmm.
interesting, right? It's like all those receptors in the body are like, oh, interesting, this doesn't hurt. Huh.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
doing the same when the saddle and girth went on, to say again, hey, look, isn't this interesting? Doesn't hurt, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but in the
Yeah.
movement. And I found that really, because for me, movement has been my main medicine. I was sort of similar to
Hmm.
you, where it's like, okay, I ended up going for so many sessions. It's like people just like, oh, she fell off the wall again, put her back together,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
like yeah. And for years with my similar back stuff, same thing, right? It'd be a couple of months and then all of a sudden the flare up and the sciatica. The biggest things have been movement for me, right?
Mm.
The
Yeah.
biggest helpers have been the daily movement practices to show my body that I'm okay,
Hmm.
we're okay. And yeah,
Yeah.
to sort of bring that back online. So I'm really excited about diving more deeply in. I would love to hear, from you, is there any particular things going on with horses that you find that the nerve release is like really so helpful with, like things that you tried to work with before and it was just not really landing in that horse?
Yeah, for me, I think God, it's just such a big subject area. I
Mm-hmm.
really think the thoracic sling piece is a big one with the brachial plexus. That's been huge. Observing the atrophy, training our eye to the atrophy as well. That has been huge. But also a lot of sciatica stuff. So a
Mm-hmm.
lot of big explosive things that horses were doing to really get away from the pain, being able to sort of train my eye to the sciatic output was really huge as well. And there are a couple of other nuanced things too. Yeah, just more about specific postural presentation. So specifically how a horse chooses to move and how that may or may not indicate nerve impingement. That's been really profound too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Awesome.
those bits
I love it.
particularly have been really, really cool.
Well, I'm very excited to see how your work continues to evolve. And I love that
Thank you.
you're a person that shares the way that you do and the detail that you do. So I hope that that continues on and I can continue to learn from your posts and all the good stuff you're
Thank
putting
you.
out. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. That's the point. That's the point. If people can, if I can give people snippets that help them to identify with their horse, then that's my day made. That's it, really. But thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for having me on. I've
Oh,
really,
it's
really enjoyed this.
an absolute pleasure. Thank you for being here. And can you just let everybody know how they can get in touch with you, Yasmin?
Yeah, so on Facebook and Instagram at Yasmin Stuart Equine Physio, and then via my website, which is www.yasminstuartequinephysio.com.
Perfect. Amazing. Well, thanks again. And
Thank you.
appreciating all of you listening in. I hope you learned a thing or two, and I'll see you all again very, very soon. Bye for now.